2016 is off to a spring-like start, and not in a good way. Record-breaking floods from last month have this year off to a painful start for a lot of people in the St. Louis region. But is this pain self-inflicted? Have we caused this flooding or made it worse than it had to be? And could we see more severe flooding more frequently? We're talking with those who know, so stay tuned.
Stay Tuned brings together local experts, journalists, civic leaders, and regular people to have tough conversations for a stronger St. Louis. Add your voice to our conversation, and you're at the table as we stay on top of current events and go deeper, bringing more light and less heat to the issues that matter. From the 9 network of public media in Grand Center, this is Stay Tuned. The damage in dollars has yet to be totaled, but there's no doubt December 2015 broke a lot of weather records. We know flooding is blamed for more than 24 deaths in Missouri and Illinois. And it's estimated in the St. Louis region alone, floodwater damaged more than 7,000 homes and businesses, leaving behind 500,000 tons of debris. All from flooding that many thought couldn't happen. Not on this scale.
We just couldn't see how it could possibly happen. It's like...
The flood of 93 didn't get us. The flood of 73, 82, none of that was even close.
While the cleanup has just begun for so many, what can we learn from this flood about the future of this region? Do we really think we can control the confluence of 2 great rivers?
I think I got to be honest that I really didn't think in my lifetime that I would see such flooding like this again in the St. Louis area. I really thought it would be well down the road. However, because the way things have changed here in the St. Louis area with the addition of more levees and the construction that has been put up now in the floodplains, that has changed the direction of the river, and it also changes the floodplain and the ability to flood very easily now. We can't put our heads in the sand and think that it won't happen again. Even in the Chesterfield Valley, you think those levees will hold? Probably not.
My thanks to my colleague at KSDK, Chief Meteorologist Cindy Presler there for a fairly frank assessment, it sounded like. Let me introduce our guest, and I'll ask him if they agree with what she had to say there. Russell Everett, hydrologist with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, St. Louis. Thanks for being here. Mark Fuchs, hydrologist with the National Weather Service. Good to see you again. We rely on you from time to time at KSDK. The mayor, who has been very busy from Eureka, Mayor Kevin Coffey, thanks for being here with us. And then Tony Messenger, columnist for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Tony, I'll start with you because you wrote a column in the last few days that had a lot of people talking about this. Tell us, who inspired the column you wrote about this flooding and kind of what he was warning us of?
The column was inspired primarily by Dr. Bob Criss, who's a professor at Washington University, who is somebody that I've met and talked to a lot over the last few years as I've researched river issues, and is sort of an expert on, well, he's not sort of an expert, he is a national expert on the flow of rivers and how they have changed over the years because of all of the management things that we have done to rivers, sometimes to try to deal with flooding, sometimes to try to deal with navigation, often just in dealing with development, like building new levees so that we can have multi-billion-dollar commercial developments. And what Dr. Criss says, and what most of the experts that I've talked to say, is that the kind of flooding that we had over the last month is something we should expect a little bit more often, that we can't just say it's only going to be a 100-year flood and a 500-year flood, because those numbers are now meaningless in terms of how climate change has changed, but also what we as citizens of the world have done to change how our rivers, specifically the Missouri and the Mississippi, flow.
I'll pose to the hydrologist at the table. Mark, I mean, does that ring true with you? I mean, we used to call, I think we called the 93 flood a 500-year flood, and it didn't take but a couple of decades to outpace it.
Sure, and when you look at that terminology, which we've changed too, because it's really a misnomer, the 100-year, the 500-year event, because people start thinking, well,
won't happen.
We had our 100-year flood, we're not going to have to worry for another 100 years, which is totally incorrect. may not see another flood like that for 200 or 300 years, or we may see one like that next week. I mean, we've gone more to a terminology of annual exceedance probability, AEPs, and it's a little more scientific, but it's a little more to the point as well. Each year, what we call a 100-year flood really means that in any given year, we have a 1% chance of getting to that level or above that level.
So do you think we'll see them more frequently, and do you think our development has anything to do with it? Our levee system?
Well, you know, when you look at the Merrimack flood that we just got through, really, clearly the worst flooding in the St. Louis area was because of the Merrimack. 95% of that basin has no levees at all. The only significant levee there that I know about is the one at Valley Park. And granted, that's a big one, and it probably displaces some water a little higher in that immediate vicinity. But did that affect the folks down at Eureka? Did it affect the folks, you know, even down toward Fenton or Arnold? Probably not.
Mayor, how did you see this flood? Put it in perspective for us.
Well, our town's been laid out for 150 years, and we have people that we had water that we'd never seen before. There was no recorded history, 3 feet more than recorded history, which is very odd. Typically, you'll see a record get broken by about a foot or half a foot. Being broken by over 3 feet is, we need to know what the new norm is. Has something changed? Has there been areas that have been filled in just along tributaries and creeks to get them out of floodplain? And where does that fill come from? In a lot of cases, I believe it comes from outside the floodplain. Just as the future goes on, we'd like to see something where when you fill an area, it should be soil or material that comes out of that area so that you're not changing the amount of flood storage.
So you're not necessarily concerned about the multi-billion-dollar development Tony's talking about, or the new outlet mall, or different things. You're talking about even small changes upriver from you or upstream from you. Have they had an impact?
Just a few inches difference makes a large impact on homes. If we'd had a foot lower on this, the damage would have been minimized. But that extra foot is really what sent it over the top to damage a lot of homes and businesses to an extent that we've never seen. And so we need to watch that. With regard to the Mississippi, this didn't really time itself out with flow into the Mississippi, but we've had backflow before. And we're concerned about that. As the Mississippi gets to the point where it rises so high and so fast, what if it's in the spring when we have a high volume coming from our area and the Mississippi's trying to back up the Merrimack? That's an area where we have a lot of concern in the future.
Russell, you're nodding your head. What's the core perspective on this?
Well, I think you need to understand the event that unfolded. There was a large rainfall event, but we had several rainfall events before this happened. So the ground was completely saturated. And also it's the seasonality. You know, the 93 flood was a summer flood. We had vegetation on the ground, able to absorb the moisture between rainfall events. We have vegetation in the overbank, so it slows the flow down even in the floodplain that's available to the river. Whereas we're in the winter months, that vegetation's not there, it's in a dormant pattern. So runoff is very high, given it's saturated, there's no vegetation, and there's no vegetation in the overbank, so it runs off into the rivers very quickly, and the rivers run very quickly as well. So I wouldn't want to say it's a new norm, but it's definitely something you need to look at. And the other thing that the Weather Service has been predicting is a strong El Nino. And we're in that cycle. And the Midwest is very difficult to forecast, and Mark could attest to that very well. It's very difficult to determine what those El Nino and La Nina patterns do to the Midwest. It's easy to predict on the coast. And so when we go from the fall months to the winter months, you get a kind of a turbulent weather pattern. We kind of get a wetter pattern. And we just got more rainfall, I think, in this season. So it's kind of, you have to be able to discern from all the data, is it El Nino, is it climate change, or is it just a wet winter? 1982 was a record flood that we broke in the Merrimack Basin. That was also a December flood. So it's not surprising to see a record flood in the Merrimack Basin in the winter months.
It's also an El Nino year.
Yes.